Welcome to another episode of Not Your Average Lives, where I highlight inspirational stories of midlife transformations. Today's guest is Julia Black, who left her career as a successful filmmaker to instigate change in the traditional educational system where her daughter was struggling. Her story is a great example of the power of a mother's love and the unstoppable determination it created as Julia sought a solution so her daughter could thrive. She started by getting an instrumental role at her daughter's school, where she was able to establish unique and creative learning situations for the children. She no longer works in the school, but now reaches many more children through her online program called Lights On, where she teaches parents how to develop children who are passionate learners and doing things that light them up inside. Although Julia isn't my typical guest who is sharing a story of midlife transformation, this is a subject that is near and dear to my heart, as I also had a similar situation with one of my daughters, which I share during our interview. I also believe that as a grandmother, I have a role in ensuring my grandchildren are lit up in the time I get to spend with them. So even if your children are now adults, I think this is a very valuable episode to listen to. Hello there, listeners, and I am here today with Julia Black, and Julia is not my normal midlife transformational storyteller. However, what she does is so, personally, I am very passionate about what she does, and because so many of us have grandchildren, it's going to help, I think, you as a listener who has grandchildren to really help your grandchildren in a special way. So Julia she was actually a filmmaker before she got into running her own business. She calls herself a social entrepreneur, and she has a program called Lights On. And what I love about what she does is she has built this specific framework that helps, and she works with adults as well as children now, but helps people learn passionately and be light. So it's called Lights On, which I love, because even with my program, it's like, what lights you up? Let's figure out what will light you up for your second half. So, and she's also a featured author in a book. So lots of great experience, but she also is a guest on podcasts, and I recently listened to one of her guest episodes, and she goes way back in her. I mean, you've been doing this for years, so why don't you go ahead? I'll turn it over to you and tell the listeners a little bit about kind of how you started in education and how you came to be developing your own program that's sort of unique.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for the introduction. And I kind of would probably say that I am midlife. I turned 50 this year. So I'm definitely in that next chapter of my life. So I mean, exactly. It's about 12 years ago now. As you say, I used to be a filmmaker, and my daughter was about to start school at age 4 here in England. We start at 4. I think it's a similar thing in the States. And I just thought it was going to be fine because she was an early reader. So she was already reading like early kind of sentences at 3. So she didn't have the dyslexic gene that I've got in my family. So I was like, okay, this is going to be a breeze, and just send her to school. She was ready. And it was kind of far from the truth. And actually, she got bored really quickly, and I started to see her get frustrated. And so it was kind of at that point when I had also started to think, as we do as mums, can I really be the filmmaker and a mum? So I was kind of going through my own kind of like, what do I do now kind of thing. And I guess I just threw myself into solving the problem of how I could get the school system to work initially for my daughter, and then I had a son as well. And as I kind of went on that journey and I got really involved at the school, I kind of eventually ended up taking my daughter out of school at age 9, because I realized that she was saying it. Her learning was fenced in. There was this glass ceiling over what she could and couldn't learn. And it was just frustrating for everyone around. And then looking back, I don't know, I was crazy. Looking back, I opened up my own creative learning center. So I was not trained in education at all, but I had begun to see through the work I was doing as a school governor, and I won an award for changing the life of my kids' school. I began to sort of see that everything I was being told in the governor meetings is, it's not how we do things, Julia. You don't know, you're not a teacher. My instincts were saying, well, I know something, and I know what we're doing right now is not working. And it's not just not working for my children, but enough of the children in the school, and it was just a small rural English school. But equally, the more research I did, it's not working for millions of children around the world. And so I kind of opened up this center, and we had children come to us who were being home educated to start with. Then we had children come to us who were in school, but it kind of wasn't really working for them. So they'd come to us for one day. And then the schools began to see what was the difference was with the children that were coming to us. So then they started sending us children. And so we ended up working with like 15 schools. And then we actually got invited to be based on a school site. So it kind of just all snowballed from being a mum, really, that was trying to solve a problem for my own children, which was like, how do I keep my child passionate, engaged in learning when the school system is really slowing down and shutting off that hunger and that curiosity? And then I began to see the impact that it was having on her mental well-being. And for me, mental well-being and learning just come hand in hand. And I love something that you say on your website, which is like, learning brings happiness. To me, if our children's lights, if our lights as adults are not on, and if we are not passionately engaged in that thing that I believe we're all born to do, we're not happy. Right. If you're not happy, you can't learn. It's not rocket science, which is kind of where I find myself now. I've got this framework which gets, children who are very bored, disengaged and switched off. And it gets them learning and reconnecting to what I call their switch, that thing that switches on their lights. And it helps them understand the perfect way for them to learn. And when we can do that, then we transform the child into this passionate, curious, hungry learner. And what I'm excited about now is that I'm actually working with mums now, because I closed down my centers, and because I saw the scale of the problem was really huge, and went online. And now I am empowering mums to use my framework. So they don't have to rely on experts.
Yes. Because, you have to get it at the adult level to influence the child and make an impact at a young age if you're not in the school system.
Exactly.
And if you're in the school system, you're only tapping into that particular school. You can only help so many people. And when you go online, you can help so many more people.
That's what's so exciting, because what I began to see is that, look, we could do the work on the school site or in my center, and we could get the transformations, but they were only lasting in the families where they had a culture of learning. And this is where it gets so exciting in terms of like really building that movement of mothers and grandmothers and a whole new generation of people who are switched onto learning, how we need to be switched onto learning for the 21st century. If we can bring lights on into homes all around the world, and we are doing that, which is really exciting, then we can actually begin to shift the way education looks for generations to come.
And I think because, and particularly the age group that I'm in, and you're in, you're 10 years younger, but we are so ingrained with the traditional way of schooling. And I have learned so much more since starting my own business online and taking all of the courses that are available online. And I think so many people think, I have to go back to school. I have to go the traditional route. And when you think of children nowadays, sometimes I think there's kids that don't belong in college. They should just start working. But the parents think you have to go to college. You need a college degree. But that's so not the way of today. You can have your own business and be making hundreds of thousands of dollars by the time you would have graduated from college and have a $400,000 bill,
Exactly. And the thing that I found really interesting is because we would work with, obviously, we've worked with so many children who are high achievers. Both of my two children, they can get the grades pretty easily. They have to put work in, but it comes quite naturally for them to learn in that kind of environment. But the thing about high achievers, so even if you think like, oh no, my child's fine and they're getting the grades and they're going to go to college and, and all of that kind of thing, what you need to be looking out for, and this as an entrepreneur yourself, you really want to be looking at have they got the emotional resilience? Because getting the grades is just jumping over a hurdle that is set at a certain level, and you either can or you can't. Yeah. And it's not to say you don't need to put in the work to get the grades, but the work, as we all know it, anyone who has, spent their lifetime working, the type of learning in that environment is completely different. And you make mistakes daily as entrepreneurs, right? That's the hardest thing. That's why so many businesses fail, because it's like, have you got the stamina to just keep getting up and get knocked back again and fail again and get things wrong and really keep walking into that unknown? And what I found by working with children and mothers now who are high achievers, for whom the education system worked, they were so fragile. And even employers are now talking about them as fragile perfects. They want to please. They will only do what it takes to get that external recognition. And that is the big thing. So I always like to sort of say, like, our education system as it stands should come with a health warning, a mental health warning, but also like with a future-proof warning, because even if your children are getting the grades, they are most unlikely to be future-proofed for the workplace, which is changing so rapidly. And so it's quite interesting, because most people tend to think, if you can get the grades, you're fine. But I actually think those children who are struggling academically in our current system are actually better placed, because they are building up that grit, that determination, that persistence. Yeah. And, so they are experiencing what it is like to be going into an environment and it's tough and you're failing day after day. So loads of stuff for us to think about, really, stop thinking in that old school way, because the future it's different now.
Yeah, I think, and also particularly in America, I don't know how it is in the UK, but there is this mindset of you do what your parents did. It's in the genes, because you'll be good at that because they were good at that. Well, maybe they weren't necessarily, maybe they're good at it, but maybe that didn't light them up either. So you're carrying on this tradition of unhappy work. But my example was my parents were both teachers, and they both got their master's degrees. So my father became an assistant principal of a middle school, and my mother became a guidance counselor. But they were history and English teachers to begin with. And then my sister went into teaching. And so, of course, I had expressed to my mother I wanted to be a social worker, because I just had this feeling of, like, I wanted to connect with people and help them. It's always been at my core. And she said, "Oh, you'll never make money doing that." And here she was a teacher, but she did have her master's degree, so she was a highly paid teacher. So I ended up studying English, and I had an opportunity to teach for an extended period of time as a substitute, and I hated it. And I had taken a break from college. And because I wasn't passionate about it, I ended up dropping out of college, becoming a waitress. And I did not like the traditional classroom at all. It was 7th grade English that I taught for 9 weeks, a whole grading period. And I was so lost, because I didn't feel that, at least I recognized to stop doing what I didn't want to do, but then I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I kind of fell into technology, and that became my career. But it's so interesting that and it's funny, because now I'm teaching and coaching, which is exactly what I think in helping people that hits my core value, but I'm doing it in a different way. I'm doing it in a way that isn't the traditional model. And it's not rigid like that traditional model either, but it's kind of interesting. So that is I think that one thing I would like to get the mindset change on here is, just because your parents did it doesn't mean that you should do it. And if there's that expectation there, like family businesses taking over the family, I feel so sorry for those kids. It's like, let them choose what they want to do, find their own way. But yeah, so that's interesting. I don't know if you have any.
Yeah, I do. And I think actually much of I always feel getting children to engage with learning is the easy part. getting their mums or their parents to step back so that they can develop and emerge as the learner that they were born to be is the harder part, which is why we kind of moved again. You know, we've had we keep pivoting because it's just like, actually, that's not the problem. You know, this is the problem. And so one of the things I say to all my mums that I coach is basically your child can only develop as a learner as far as you are developed as a learner. And this is particularly true with mindset, because you know, it's the children, you need to be creating a culture of learning in your homes, and as grandmothers, if your grandmothers really empowering your own children, so your own daughters or sons, to be creating that environment in their homes that is as 21st century culture of learning. And what you need to be looking out for is flexibility of mind. Getting things wrong. So we do a lot of work with our families to be able to really prime in the fact that actually learning is making mistakes. It's creating new neural pathways that haven't yet developed. And so if you are learning, you should be getting things wrong. And that is really liberating. And children used to come into our center and they would be like, oh my goodness, exploring anything as possible. And you would see them kind of almost be so free. And then they would get collected at the end of the day with their parents, and you'd see them almost sometimes just tighten up. So really the biggest gift I can give your audience is to really think about, does your own family, and that includes your relationship with your children and then therefore their relationship with your grandchildren, is there a culture that really supports learning, true learning, lasting learning, deep learning in their home? And how are you role modeling that? How are you role modeling, so one of the biggest things that parents come to us with the frustration, right, is like, oh, my child won't put any effort in. They always give up. They never complete anything. And so very, very quickly we flush out, well, is that a pattern within your family? And it's like, yeah. And we're like, well, if you're not showing up 100%, that's what they're seeing. So when you tell them, like, why can't you just do your homework and this, or they're looking at the wrong problem. So there's a complete mind shift really that needs to go on if you want to, what I call future-proof your children or your grandchildren. Because the jobs that we are doing as parents, they possibly won't even exist. And if we still continue to look through the lens of traditional, well, you'll go to college and you become a profession, a doctor or a lawyer or an accountant, even those industries are going to be disrupted. So even if you are going, into, or your child or your grandchildren might be going into that kind of professional stream, you still want to make sure that they've got this ability to unlearn and relearn. And the quote I always love sharing is by Alvin Toffler, and he says the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those children who can't read or write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. And that, I think, sums it up. It's just like the best learners that I met as children were those that reading and writing came difficult to them. But you know what? When we empowered them to think differently, to be freed up, to be different in our space, they came alive as learners. When those that could read or write were freed up to have autonomy and independent thinking, they didn't really know what to do. And they kept looking to us for answers. So yeah, absolutely. For me, old school thinking should just now be out of any household. And I talk about it as being illuminated thinking, and really focusing on getting to know your child or your grandchildren as to what is that thing that switches on their lights. And the evidence is there if you know where to look. It's just we have become trained, and especially if you're in a family of teachers, you kind of have been looking over there. And actually, you've been really missing where the magic is. So just simple reframes.
And what's so interesting is that we we think we're helping our children. When we're like, no, you do it this way. This is the right way to do it. Instead of saying, oh my gosh, that's such an interesting way of doing it. And like celebrating the fact that they failed, which is not like instinctual as a parent, because you feel like I should be teaching them. But the same goes for when you're, and this can be applied to anybody who's in business or as a manager in business, is like the best thing you could do as a manager is to delegate and then let those people you're parenting, that you're managing, fail, because you learn more by that. And we just are so much wanting to get it right instead of being okay with the fact that it might or be a different way.
Exactly. And I think that's another thing, just to check in with where you are, because what is happening. So I've got the Lights On Academy, which is using our framework, and parents or grandparents can kind of use our tools and techniques to get their children, learning in a different way. But what we've also set up is like an 8-week program for mums, only for mums. And it really is about kind of detaching almost the fact that their children are mirroring back at them their own self-doubt, their own insecurities. And when you can detach from the fact that your child is not an extension of you, your child is not a reflection of you, then you can really begin to empower them. And like you say, I love that, like just step back and let them fail, stop. We're in this kind of time where we're helicopter parents, it's like they fall over, and we kind of cuddle them straight away. And it's that thing of, it's hard to let your children kind of, when you can see where they're heading, but that's the real world that they're going into. And so if they haven't had any of that preparation where they have experienced that failure, I always think about a failure as being like an emotional wound. It's a blow to the gut. It can make you feel sick. You can knock you out for days, but it's about how you use that point of learning to grow from, and how you recover, and how quickly, they talk about this sort of bounceability, how quickly you bounce back from having that big knock. And I think when parents and grandparents can kind of disconnect the fact that how their child achieves at school, and they can disconnect that from their own self-worth, then that is going to be the biggest gift that they can give them. Because we see it. That's why the tutoring business is so, industry is so huge, because parents get caught up in the fact that their children are behind. Parents say that to me all the time. My child's falling behind. I'm like, behind what? Yeah. Behind who? Yeah. It's like maybe they're not ever meant to be up there against the A grader or and actually look at the A grader, and maybe they are up behind the child who's failing academically, because look, they cry every time they get one wrong, so it becomes less about comparison. And I think this is where we're really shifting into an interesting time in history, even with business, where we are learning to collaborate more rather than be competitive. Yeah. And I think that's a massive shift as well. And I talk about the 4 C's, the 21st century skills, which is communication, collaboration, critical thinking, and creativity. And if you can empower your children or your grandchildren to be developing those skills, then you know that no matter what, because obstacles, we can't protect our children or our families from obstacles, they will be all right. And encourage that openness to talk about sometimes the shame that can come with getting something wrong, the vulnerability that can come from putting your head up above the parapet and being brave enough to potentially, to fail. Yeah. And
I feel like, if you're thinking God, the universe, or whatever, whoever anointed us, and said, okay, soul, you're going to earth, and these are going to be your jobs. I think about my job as a mother wasn't to create another Lori. It was to create and to shine the light on these souls that were given to me for a period of time. And not, I think so many parents, we just like, they have to fit into and some kids rebel against that, and they think, oh, this is my difficult child, instead of like celebrating, you were given this child, and so how's that child going to make you grow, and how can you highlight what is special about this kid? And I think like I have my own story with my second daughter. I have two girls, and my oldest daughter was very much the typical older daughter, please the parent, do well in school, and yes, mom, yeah, everything. And my younger one, who was 18 months younger, she was a little bit of a rebel. And so she was a little bit harder for me to parent because it was different. You think your kids are, same parenting, that it's going to work with both. And it didn't. But she was very, like, my older one was extrovert like me, and my younger one, which I didn't even realize at the time until she was like 18, it was an introvert. And so she would react to things differently. The stimuli, and she also felt like my older daughter and I were more connected because she saw that we were alike, and she felt very different. She was more like my ex-husband, who is wonderful. And so, but she identified with him because he was an introvert. But anyways, so she was talented and gifted, as they GT, they call it here. And so she was put into a special classroom. But the way it was done with her is she was mainstreamed, but she was taken away on certain, like, I don't know if it was 1 or 2 days a week. And she was bused to a different school in a different location. Yeah. And she hated that. She felt like instead of feeling special, she felt kind of like she liked her regular class, and she didn't feel like she was as smart as the other kids. So there was a lot of things so she ended up dropping out of the Talented and Gifted program. She was miserable. And so I wasn't going to keep her in something that was making her miserable. So fast forward. So there's 4 years in high school in America. So or at least where we were, because I know some things are different now. But so when she was going into her second year actually her third year, she had done 2 years, and it was like the summer before her third year, and her sister had just gone off to college. So I think there was some of that going on, but she just like completely disconnected. She had gotten like super grades, like eight straight A's through like middle school. And then she started getting C's. And I remember, and she stopped doing her homework. I remember going to her and saying, why are you not doing your homework? And she said, well, I figured it out. I know I can, if I don't do this, this, and this, I'll still get a C. And I'm like, a C? You don't want a C because you're not going to get into a good college if you get a C. And she goes, well, I don't want to go to college. You want me to go to college, but I don't want to go to college. And it hit me. And it was like, my kid hates learning. She is in this traditional model that is not working for her. And she wasn't stimulated. And so I basically made the decision with my ex-husband to pull her out of traditional school. And we weren't able to homeschool. Neither of us, I didn't think we had the capability, number one. And number two, we both had full-time jobs, so we didn't have the time. And in our state, it's different state to state, but in our state, you had to have a college degree to homeschool your kid. Okay. And my ex-husband had one, but I didn't. So I could have never even done it. But we found a place. I went to the Yellow Pages and found a school that she could go to, but they taught homeschool curriculum. And we had to have one of the parents say that they were the homeschool teacher, even though she was going to a school. And it was thousands. We paid as much as more than a college would cost for those last 2 years of high school. And she went, and the other thing that bothered me is that the traditional public school, they put these threats almost to you. Like, so if it doesn't work out, if you come back, you have to repeat the grade that you left at. And you couldn't participate in sports. And she was on the soccer team. So there were these things that were like trying to prevent you from doing what was right for your child. So the system wasn't supporting and I was really worried about her mentally. That's an age where kids do crazy things. And I was just like, I could tell she was depressed. And my goal was to get her to love learning again, because your life, if you stop wanting to learn, that I feel like your life almost stops. And so we put her in this environment. And it was very much like college. She had her driver's license at the time. She drove to a building in the next town over. It was like a traditional office building, and she went to class there. And she had class only certain days a week. She was like off on Fridays. And it was very small. It was like 6 or 7 people per class. And she lit up within a matter of just a month, probably. And she would come home and talk about the lessons that she was receiving. And history, she started to love history, which, I never liked and appreciated till I was an adult, and you start realizing how important it is. So my story is just that I sought something better for my child because the traditional system didn't work. And I'm so thankful. And I look back, and she says today, she's glad that we did that. She knows it was a big risk, and it was something really out of the norm for back then. And all of her friends still went to her. I said to her, even, you're not going to be able to play soccer anymore. And she said, and she was on a club team, as they call it. So that, she still got to play soccer in a sense, but the high school team was, they went to the state. They won when she was, doing this other school. She missed being on the team that won the state final. And when I said to her, you're not going to be able to play soccer, she goes, well, you care about that. I don't care about that. And so I started realizing I need to do what she wants, not what works for me. I'm going to miss those games, but it's more important my kid thrives. So I thought, I think that's another reason why I really honed in on what you do and how important it is, and how we as just because we're grandparents and we're a little bit removed, we still can be role models and influential in our kids' lives. And we still have a voice to our children that says, hey, you should try this, or hey, what about this? And, celebrate the uniqueness about each of the children.
Yeah, there's so much that you've sort of said in there that I just want to pick up on to kind of from a culture of learning perspective. Firstly is that listen to your children. And that's why I've kind of called it Lights On, because it was like I would like to get rid of exams. So, I've got my long vision is like changing and disrupting the education system as it currently is. And I went and met with a business strategist, and I was just kind of like, because people would always say to me, like, how will you know they learn? Or they're learning. And I said to him, like, I want to find that thing that can be my metric, so that we can really look at the success. And he says, well, how do you know? How do you know when they are learning? And I said, because you just see it. You see it in their eyes. It's like their lights have come on. And he was like, well, there you go, lights on or off. And to me, I feel this is like the biggest game changer, because the other thing that you said there was like, if you're not learning, it does become a mental health issue, because learning is as natural to us as breathing. We are learning beings. We the moment we are born, we are learning instinctively. We're tapping into learnt, memory patterns. We are kind of an accelerated growth of learning in the first, 3 to 7 years. And the way our brains structure is that they are so, through the neuroplasticity, they are so malleable that we can, we kind of almost like the perfect learning machines. And then what happens is that gets cut off, like you say, because, nothing that we are doing wrong, except we are doing things wrong because we don't know any other how. Yeah, we've come to learn to trust the experts, to send them to school, and they know all about learning. But the problem there is that they've also become disconnected to, like, well, what does learning look like today? So there's that. There's listen and look at your child. Can you see it in your children or your grandchildren's eyes? Are they excited? So when your daughter kind of came home and was suddenly enthusiastic about learning, and your own realization that actually what had happened was she disconnected from learning. So she was no longer learning. And it does not take any time at all for us to be disconnected as human beings. If we become disconnected from that thing that takes us into that sort of flow-like space, that thing that we just feel like, oh, it is good to be me. If we become disconnected to that, there's a really, really rapid descent into depression, anxiety, headaches, sleeplessness. And there's an amazing research program that was done in the 70s by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. And basically his whole concept is flow, getting into that flow when we lose that sense of time and we just are, we are being. And he got these participants to identify first what it was that got them into that state of flow. And then he asked them to basically scrub it out of their week, they were not allowed to do anything that would normally give them that kind of that time in their day where they were just, sort of almost at one with being who they were really. And they had to cancel the experiment after just 48 hours because the participants were beginning to show sort of almost like psychotic characteristics of severe depression. And this is again what you have just shared with your story about your daughter. The amazing thing is, just as quickly as our children's lights can go off, or our own lights as adults can go off, and we can sink into depression or anxiety, or we can't sleep, or we just get these repetitive thoughts, we can just as quickly switch ourselves back on if we know and reconnect to that thing that we love to do.
Yeah.
I think the problem is with where we are as a society, globally, really, is if parents don't act and intervene like you did, we have a generation of children who have spent 14 years minimum inside what is meant to be a learning environment, not learning.
Yeah.
Where we have taken away their own free will, we have taken away their autonomy, we have taken away their independent thought, we have crushed all of their curiosity. We have said, no, there's no time to be creative right now. You've just got to knuckle down, do your homework and get the results. And we have literally stripped them of everything it means to be a learning human being. And that to me is the real crime. And I kind of really urge your audience or anyone I kind of really meet to really wake up to that, to really wake up to the fact that you can change that really quickly by looking for different metrics of success. And for me, the only one that matters is, are your child's lights on? Yeah. The majority of the time? Do they know what it is that they need to do to have time learning with their lights on? And are they spending enough time in their week learning through that passion where they can build up that resilience to be able to carry them through when life gets difficult, which it will, without a doubt. And if you can just start looking at those metrics, are going to be so much more empowering to your child than the grades, then that's going to transform not only your relationship. I imagine you saw that with your relationship with your daughter suddenly transform and open up, and there'll be a better connection. But you're going to be less stressed. You're going to have a much happier household. But you're also can then really know, and as grandparents in your community, I think it's an amazing gift if you can gift this to your own children to be able to gift it to their children, to really empower your children to get it wrong too. Yeah. But also kind of not go in there with that judgment that sometimes I know we can all feel from our parents, to go in with that kind of openness to helping them and supporting them to create a different culture of learning.
Yeah. I could tell that, number one, she was depressed. I could tell she was depressed. And I could tell that she was the best way to describe it is that she had lost all confidence in, she just was carrying herself shoulders down, just not happy. And I knew, I felt that with her school that there were 31, 32 kids in her class, and she was being lost among everybody. So I don't think she felt anybody cared.
Absolutely. And if I can just pick up on that, because she felt lost among everybody. What's worse is that teenagers, when we get to that state, disconnected with learning, we actually feel lost within ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a very scary place to be. Yeah. Because we can kind of cover up when we're in a group, and people get really good at it. Strategies for covering it up. Maybe they take a deep breath before they walk into the room, and nobody would know that they were feeling like that. But feeling lost within yourself is the real thing to guard against for your children. Mm-hmm. Because we've talked to loads of teenagers and children. And this was, again, where my daughter, who was very articulate at an early age, she just said that she just felt that no one valued who she was. Mm. And that she was actually, everyone was trying to turn her into something that she wasn't. And this is what the language that teenagers use. I felt chained down. I felt I was on a sandy beach with a teaspoon, and someone was like, with a spade was just piling on this sand, and I couldn't dig away the sand enough to get, to stop that feeling of suffocation. I felt fenced in, drowning. And if we think of all of those words that our children use, so I always say, really listen as well to the language they use and don't dismiss it. But, and then we can just really understand, like, feeling lost within yourself is a frightening place to be, because there's nothing anchoring you to who you are. Yeah. And when you don't know who you are, when our children don't have that really strong connection, then that's when, like you say, risky behaviors can start setting in, because you're looking to that immediate dopamine hit. Yeah. And that's obviously, like with screen time now and video games, it's kind of like the modern day drug. It's like it's designed, video games they're amazing because they are designed to tap into how your brain is designed to learn. Enough rewards, to make you feel like you can keep going, a bit of a challenge so that it doesn't get boring, a massive success, dopamine hit, and then it gets harder again, and it takes you, get on the cycle. So if we as human beings don't have that kind of learning curve in our lives naturally, then we are going to seek that reward system elsewhere. Yeah. But the exciting thing is, actually, we are as human beings really resilient. And what I'm excited about is to be able to help parents use the tools and techniques that we've tried and tested on, thousands of children, and for them to be getting the results that they're getting. This is where I feel it's time for education to evolve. There will be an evolution of education where hopefully parents will start saying, well, I want some of what that family's got, because you can see it. You can see it in their eyes. Their lights are on. There are lights on family, and they are thriving and flourishing. Yeah, and they're on an adventure.
My daughter never felt like she lost anything. Her friends she still did everything with her friends in the high school. She still went to 2 different proms, and so and I think, I've often thought, well, earlier, now I don't, but earlier I often thought, did I overreact? Maybe she would have been okay. It just was a spell, but that's my brain. Yeah. And I always say, follow your heart. And I think I've made a lot of mistakes in my own life with following my brain before my heart. But when it came to her, I went with my gut. I just knew in my gut I needed to do that. And looking back, I'm so glad and thankful that I did it, because if I hadn't and I'd listened to this, it could have had some really, really negative. And she today, she's so smart. And one thing, you were talking about the sand and the teaspoon versus the spade, and she was suffocating. One thing she told me was, she's super pretty, very attractive. And she said, nobody ever listens to me. Mm. They just say I'm pretty. And then they don't ever think I have anything valuable to say. And so she wasn't feeling listened to in the environment that she was in until she went to a much smaller, more customized learning experience. And
and then again, what's interesting there is obviously the labels that we can so freely dish out. It's exactly that. I can relate to being that child, like your younger daughter. Do you know what I mean? I was just more difficult. And it's interesting for me to now kind of work through that, as I try and reach, I want to reach 1 million families by 2025. And so I've got to kind of, do the neurohacking, that we're doing. And and it was really interesting to look back. And on the one hand, the label of being the difficult child has prepared me to be an entrepreneur, because it's kind of, I didn't really care, my position in my family was always the one who'd have the arguments, or the one who would strop off, and go and have a tantrum somewhere, or, slam the doors, and not really necessarily care. I wasn't seeking my position in the family by being perfect. So I kind of really embraced this is me, imperfect. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. In all my gloriousness. Yeah. So on the one hand, it kind of worked really well for me for, what I have gone on to do in life. I am a natural disruptor. But what has been really interesting for me recently was to actually also realize that it was time for me to shed that label that I'm difficult, and a couple of interactions with sort of friends who didn't necessarily know me as a child. And I sort of said, oh, well, I'm difficult. They just looked at me like, you're not difficult. And again, it was so interesting to see how we carry these labels through life. And I always say to any parent, if you're going to have a label or put a label on your child, so maybe you seek a diagnosis or something, make sure that it's one that they can own with pride, and make sure it's one that works, for them. Right. And, and again, I think as we move into, another chapter in our lives as mature women, I think it's also important to really, and I'm sure this is a lot of what you do, is, what labels have worked for me maybe? What labels have I been carrying around? And now actually, which ones can I get rid of? And really start to own that identity of, this is who I am now, because our lives are divided up into chapters. And that is really liberating, because to me, that's what learning is. It's the constant evolution of who we are. Yeah. And if we can embrace that, and if we can allow our children to embrace that, then that is really, I think, the biggest gift that we as mothers can give to our children. Let them evolve into the human beings that they were born to become.
Yeah, I love that. Constant evolution. Learning is a constant evolution of who we are. I love that quote. Okay, so I could go on and on.
I'll have to come back another time.
Yes, part two. We have to end it, but tell me how people can get in touch with you if they're interested in Lights Up, and also just a final thought you want to leave to, if there's a grandmother listening, how can she help her grandchild who might be struggling?
Brilliant. Okay. So anyone who wants to get in touch, probably the best place is explorium.co.uk, which is our website. We have these amazing, what we call pop-up parties, and we're going to do one a month, all of next year. We've done 2 of them, and they're really fun. And they are a space where we share one of our really simple tools to use. And I kind of think those would be perfect for grandmothers, especially in December. We've got one coming up in, I think you want to be positively, as a grandmother, contributing to the learning culture that your grandchildren are growing up in. And again, you just really check in, and not one of judgment, because we got to be aware of that your children might feel you're judging them by going in to help develop their children as learners. But really become kind of aware of the learning culture and how much you as a grandmother are role modeling being a learner again. I think you can have real fun with this with your grandchildren, because obviously as a I don't know yet, I'm not there, but you've got that luxurious nature of the relationship where you can go in, you can potentially have fun, be more creative, and then you can leave, right? I would say make the most of that. Really make the most of that opportunity to go in and get to know your grandchildren as learners. And as I say, we have these pop-up parties, which are 3 days where we're in a closed Facebook group. So again, we've got details of that on our website. And we give a technique and a simple strategy that you could absolutely do with your grandchildren once a month or every Sunday or something like that. And the learning, that the intelligence and data and the metrics that you get from what is a really fun, creative exploration activity is what is going to influence how you can talk to your grandchildren about learning, how you can recognize the perfect way really for them to learn. And once you know that, once you know what a person's switch is, then it informs all the presents you buy them. It informs the quality time that you have with them. And you can just start absolutely thinking in a whole new way that your role as a grandmother is to nurture the natural born talent in your grandchildren. And I think that'd be an amazing gift.
Yes, I love that. Well, thank you so much. I hope this makes an impact. And I think, if anybody hears my story with my daughter, I hope that it helps maybe a teenager who is struggling. That would be amazing if we could do that through this broadcast. So thank you, Julia. Well, I definitely will have you back next year. And thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you.